you're not Ultron. Just stop trying to be Ultron. You're not there. You're never gonna get there. It's not in the cards. You're just not Ultron. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Arrow. We have quite a bit to discuss today. This time we're talking about the penultimate episode, which is called Lost in the Flood. Basically, we have exactly what I was saying in the previous episode, which is last week was the setup to everything going to hell. Today, everything is about to go to hell, or has gone to hell by the end of this. And then next week, we will talk about how we recover from getting lost in hell. It's actually a much smaller thing than the previous 3 seasons, because, I mean, just by comparison, you have League of Assassins invading, you have super soldiers with Deathstroke masks, you have earthquake machines that crumble entire city blocks. This time around, it's more of the stakes are really high, and the threat is pretty big, but there isn't, like, physical evidence of things going nuts. As far as I can tell with the way this episode plays, there isn't like a citywide panic being induced based on these events. And obviously there are lots of crazy things that happen towards the end of this, but it's not the same kind of evacuate house and home, entire police force is swamped, people are dying left and right kind of situation. So props for at least toning it down on the casualty count, because it is like the Dragon Ball Z effect of once you start a series with characters strong enough to blow up a planet, the ability to scale and conceive how strong these characters have gotten just goes right out the window. When you start with earthquake machines, when you start with super soldiers, at some point it's very difficult for you to put yourself in the headspace of the people in this city just because you wouldn't know how to go any higher than that. So that's the big thing here, that's the big compliment, is that I appreciate that. Although there is a negative side of that, and that's what I'm going to mainly try and talk about. Essentially what we have here is Felicity and her father and Curtis, not Mr. Terrific yet kind of guy, are trying to hack the Rubicon device and stop Damien Dark from launching all the nuclear missiles, while at the same time Oliver and Diggle with an even dumber looking helmet. I just noticed this, that Diggle did change helmets like halfway through the season, but the second one he got that doesn't go all the way back, that isn't a Magneto helmet and is just kind of like a frontal visor, looks even stupider. So him and Oliver are going down to the underground sort of Noah's Ark habitat that Thea is trapped in. And we pick up with her after her boyfriend Alex dies, and anarchy getting loose, and Malcolm Merlyn deciding that he's going to have to drug her and make her compliant with Damien Dark in order for this whole thing to work out. Oliver and Diggle break in. There's a whole bunch of fighting to try and get Thea out. Thea under mind control, threatening Oliver. While at the same time, Felicity's mom and dad are squabbling with each other while they're trying to stop the Rubicon device, and towards the end they do succeed, and Thea is back, but the big cliffhanger ending is Damien Dark is in the house and he's about to attack Felicity and her family. So that's what we're left off with, and we're teased with the next episode being called Schism, that there's about to be a big final confrontation. So I don't want to say too much here. I don't want to, usually what I would do is I would go scene by scene, just recapping the episode and throw my comments in as I'm recapping. But I can't really do that this time around, because a lot of this is sort of built on what happened in the previous episode and intended to be followed up on when we get to the season finale. So it will almost have been easier to review all 3 of these episodes at once as opposed to talking about them individually, because it's kind of like I'm just reading 3 pages of a comic and then talking about them, and then reading another 3 pages, and then talking about them, and then another 3 pages and talking about them. And it's not like a single issue kind of thing. It's not, because that's the thing with these episodes, is that a lot of the material we're getting is being stretched because of action sequences, and if you just condense all of that and you get rid of all the flashbacks that don't mean anything, you only have about 8 episodes, maybe a little bit more worth of material to talk about. And so it doesn't even feel like I'm talking about a full act of a story. I'm just kind of talking about some stray events that are even more deeply linked to the things that we've already seen. It's one of those things where, with Arrow, at some point you could have just picked up halfway through the season and kept going, and this is not one of those episodes. You can't really do that here, which is fine. It's a penultimate episode to a season. It's supposed to work that way. The issue just simply being that, again, too much action, not enough actual story and substance here. So the theme of today's discussion, because I wasn't really intending this to be where I went, but I feel like I kind of need to bring this up. The theme of today's discussion is a comment I got on the previous video. A really interesting comment. It's always fun to have people discuss the show with me through that. And basically, the comment's up on the screen, and what it reads is that there are events that take place that we do not see, that there are events off camera. And these off-camera events should feed into more of our character motivations, and we shouldn't just assume because we haven't seen everything, things aren't happening, which is totally fair. I completely understand that mentality. I completely understand the idea that we don't need to see every single date in a relationship between two characters. We just kind of need the high points of it to kind of understand and sort of string us along there, the kind of cut out all the melodrama. And I understand where you're coming from with that. The problem is, when you do that, every time we check back in through a progressing story, what we see has to be both important and drive us forward. It has to be part of the story. It has to have legs. It has to keep moving. And we don't do that with Arrow. What we do is we kind of just throw characters together randomly and check in on them randomly because this cast has gotten so massive at this point. And instead of giving us the sense that these people have gotten to know each other over the course of very small scenes together on screen, but very much of their time being spent together off screen, we're kind of just getting a sense of these characters' entire relationship is founded on these small collections of moments that we have showed you. And it doesn't really seem to understand how that's supposed to work. And that's the core of the problem here, is that there are lots of things happening. None of it's really progressing from a natural character place. And most of it's just kind of there to either fool the audience into thinking this is more exciting than it is, or to try and progress and contrive situations for us to get to certain other scenes that are just there to fool the audience into thinking this is more important than it is. And that goes into the whole bit here of Damien Darhk basically just being Ultron, or trying to be Ultron. The whole idea here of humanity's not the thing worth saving, that we have to boom the end, start again. And I like that idea. That's always my favorite sort of supervillain motivation, is that humanity, as a collective, hasn't done anything to warrant its continued existence. Or are we talking about existence being just a necessity in general? What is it about us that gives us the sort of arrogance to think that we should keep going? And questioning that, I think, is always fascinating. And Ultron does it magnificently, and Yu Yu Hakusho does it really well when you get to the spirit detective stuff with Sensui. This show does not do it well. And the part of the problem is what your comment had suggested. It is part of the problem of things happening off screen and us not having emotional investment in them because we aren't seeing them. There is supposed to be an emotional gut punch in this episode. There's supposed to be a moment here where Oliver and Diggle confront a family living inside of this tiny Noah's Ark sort of area, and Oliver is like, don't worry, we'll get you out, and it's the drugs that make you compliant and all that stuff, and the family's like, no, we didn't take any drugs, we believe in Damien Darhk, we think the world is a bad place, and we don't have hope for the future unless we start over again. And, you're supposed to have a really interesting philosophical, emotional discussion about what that's supposed to mean, but then Oliver is just like, what? What are you talking about? Who are you people? You're crazy. His acting just treats it as if these people don't really, their perspective doesn't really gain any weight. The show has sort of courted you into a certain ideal of heroism that's so inconsistent and poorly conceived that any sort of challenge to it from these characters' perspectives is ludicrous. And that's part of the problem, is that we keep pairing these characters up against each other. We keep having these bad interpersonal relationships and bickering in between the team, that any sort of universal idea of goodness and heroism never shines forth. Yet towards the end of every season, we like to pretend like it has. We like to pretend like by the time we get to an end of the season, everyone's sort of grown to realize what the greater good is supposed to be. And so the challenge, the struggle of a very moral grayness becomes very definitive black and white. And here towards the end, that's what we're supposed to get. We're supposed to get oh my god, we are in this light, look at how much in the darkness these people are, and that's not how it plays. And it goes back to this idea of, yes, if you're in this city after 4 years of this insanity, then obviously you're going to have that mentality of like this. You would become sort of nihilistic. You'd become sort of almost absurdist and just say like, what's the point? And you would believe in something like Damien Dark. The problem is the show never focuses on that. It likes to say that the city is a character. It likes to say that Oliver and the rest of his band of archers and non-archers and stupid helmet-wearing people are representative of what the city is going through, and that what they're doing is for the collective good of the city. The city has a life that they're trying to preserve, and you can't get a sense of that unless you check in with the city itself. Like, the mayoral election was supposed to do that, but all we really got in that election was very consistent with actual politics in the sense that just platitudes, just blanket statements of this is good and this is bad and this is obviously bad and this is obviously good and I believe this thing that you can't coherently argue against because it isn't a coherently formed thought in the first place kind of thing. There was just so much, not even semantical discussion, but just like blanket statement discussion of things that we never emotionally resonate or stop and discuss. So when that family shows up that has lost faith in the city, that is supposed to be building throughout this whole season, this whole idea of giving the city hope again, it doesn't play. It doesn't play because I'm not with those people. I'm not with that discussion. I'm not with that mentality enough to actually care about any of it. And this is an important ethical discussion. This is an important theme. Age of Ultron is all about this, and it takes so much time just slowing us down and talking to the characters and trying to figure out how their personal lives, their ideas of heroism, and the lives of actual people can be in friction with each other, and where is the harmony, and kind of coming away at the end saying that there is a harmony to be found. We haven't gotten there yet, and we need to keep getting better, not start over. Like, we can't quit on ourselves kind of thing. And Arrow is trying to do that. Arrow kind of thought it was doing that with Laurel's death, and Oliver supposedly like trying to use that as a leap forward instead of an emotional step backwards, but we're not with him enough. We're not discussing this either consistently enough or throughout the season enough for these final episodes to really play. A lot of the emotional character, philosophical stuff that this episode is trying to convey, it is stringing together from the last few episodes, when this whole season should have been more about that, and it should have done more to make those ideas resonate with us, to make those ideas more clear. And so that's why it ultimately doesn't play. Now, the big cap off to all of this we will handle next week when we get to Schism. And this is a bit of a shorter episode, a bit of a shorter discussion, because I can't really recap everything. I can't really, like, touch on scene by scene what's going on. There's some really stupid scene stuff here and there. There's some really dumb stuff all the way throughout this that I kind of want to touch on, but I also don't want to be unfair to this as the middle of a story. This is so much more part of a bigger whole that criticizing it and bashing it too much just wouldn't be fair. And again, I want to see where this goes. I want to trust that there is some character stuff from the previous episode that this episode doesn't touch on, but I want to give it the benefit of the doubt and say maybe that's because that scene, that progression has to stop and come next episode. Maybe I'm being too charitable with it, but again, I want to like this show. I always want to go into it liking the show. So this is more of an easy, I will let you off the hook moment, because I want to see where you're going. I want to stick with you until the end so we can more coherently talk about what you did right and what you did wrong. The only 2 or 3 small things I would mention here and there is we have stupid hacking again. We have this really dumb collection of scenes where Felicity, her father, and Curtis are hacking against Felicity's ex-boyfriend, who Damien Dark brought in to help protect Rubicon. And those scenes are just nonsensical. Like, they're just really bad technobabble, really dumb. Suspension of disbelief only goes so far. Like, I can suspend disbelief enough to say, okay, there is like a weird numbered universe inside of a computer where 2 conscious beings like Jarvis and Ultron can talk to each other. But I can't suspend disbelief enough to say that someone can just like through coding, make it so bombs are going off on your computer, and that while those bombs are going off in your computer, you still have enough processing power and enough coherent parts in your computer to still do what you're doing. Like, if your monitor is exploding in front of you, I just don't see how you could use that same monitor and computer system to go in and continue hacking, especially considering the previous episode talking about how this is like a more powerful system, that this is you need much more strength to hack into Rubicon, and this is supposed to be like a top-of-the-line machine. Apparently it's so top-of-the-line that it's not delicate, and that you can just like throw bombs in front of it and it will still function properly. But whatever, I guess we'll just assume it's like a Tron speeder bike fight within the computer that's going on. And Felicity just knows the secret language of Tron that no one else in this series seems to. So whatever, I will let that go, but it is really dumb. The other thing is, Glenn Winters directed this episode. He directs a lot of these. He's sort of like for the most part, he's like the tone setter. He's the guy I've seen do most of these episodes, and almost every episode of Arrow is kind of like in the vein of what he's doing. It didn't used to be that way, but like it's sort of become like he's their guy. He's directorially their lead, and there's just some really bad directing here, like really bad transitions between scenes, really bad music choices where you hear like almost Windows or Apple startup beeps in the score as scenes are happening. Really bad kind of like cheesy cuts between things. Really poorly handled camera movements throughout, where like you can't really get a sense of the motion of the show. And then some scenes that are trying to be too artsy, like fading one scene out and then pulling out as if that scene so like having a scene, and then as it fades out you transition into a gun barrel and zoom out of the gun barrel as if you saw that scene inside the gun barrel kind of thing, and trying to be more artsy than that scene actually warrants, and it just becomes kind of distracting. That is a nitpick. That and the computer thing are both nitpicks, but like it's just a weirdly directed episode. It's a really edited episode. It feels like they were like rushing production of this one so that we could get to the next one, which TV show production wise I can understand how that might happen. It just kind of put me off as I was watching it. So yeah, not as many jokes this time around, not as much as nitpicking and like story and character bashing yet, because there's a lot to talk about, but there's a lot that's just hanging in the air until next week. So we'll be back next time to talk about the season finale of Arrow Season 4. Thanks everybody for watching, and I'll see you next time.